So here's our outline for the presentation. So we're going to go over a little bit on the importance of oaks. I'm sure you heard some of this information from a previous presentation. Then we'll talk about herbivory. And herbivory on plants is going to take shape in different forms. So we have like the traditional herbivory where there's an insect, munching on leaves. But herbivory also includes things like boring into the wood of the tree. Creating galls is also herbivory. There are a ton of different types of herbivore damage that occurs on oaks, but these are the three that we're going to touch upon when we do the presentation. We're going to be talking about pollination. So, so types of insects that have visited for pollinating it. And then importance of oaks as shelter for insects. And then tie it up a little bit towards the end on uh, how oaks and insects play a role and help with birds as well. So if you want to follow along with me there in the presentation, the ribbon at the top has just to tell you what section of the presentation we're in. So some background information on oaks. Oaks are in the genus Quercus. So these are trees that range across a variety of habitats across North America, the United States, Canada, even parts of Mexico, and all the way out to the coast of California. There are a variety of species. Um, Pre-colonial time, it actually was one of the most abundant tree species in our forests. They considered it either a keystone species because it supports a lot of other organisms, or a foundation species because it was so common. And I know this. I have this figure out here with a map of the Northeast showing you pre-colonial times and modern, and then the change. And Pennsylvania is a primarily forested state. And you're looking down at the Pennsylvania all the way down at the bottom left, you can see like those areas of purple were areas where there was higher concentrations of oaks. And those dark purples have changed to a little bit lighter. And then over time, since this study was published, there's been, a 20% reduction in the abundance of oak species that we have here in Pennsylvania, and then, across other parts of the Northeast, including New York State and parts of New England. So it supports a ton of different organisms. So here on this figure, we have, the insects up in the canopy are, they're the ones, their caterpillars are feeding on the leaves. The birds are probably visiting the tree to catch those caterpillars to feed their young. You have galls. You have, birds like kind of like this jay here eating an acorn. Um, and then, so not just birds and insects, but other organisms, even frogs or toads are using it for shelter. There are different types of mushrooms growing on these trees. Our animals that are really common, our mammals are super common around, like deer, white-footed mice, and black bears and turkeys also benefit from these periods when these trees are producing a ton of acorns, especially masting years. And black bears, they actually like to eat all these acorns. During masting years, they actually notice that the bears actually stay away from people's properties because they don't have to go around foraging for food so much. They don't have to go after your garbage can. So how these trees are able to support bear populations as well. Down at bottom number one, you see that this caterpillar or this grub coming out, those are the larvae of wood-boring insects that are using oaks as a food source as well. So oaks, with climate change, they've been becoming more and more sensitive over time. And they're kind of being pushed past what they can tolerate as far as like weather, or resources for water. So oaks are typically a drought-resistant species, but with so many periods of thawing and freezing, all that wood expansion and contraction is actually putting a lot of stress on these trees. And and then if we have prolonged times without any rain, they tend to become very, very stressed. And when they become very, very stressed, they become vulnerable to the organisms that try to eat them. So you have all those insects. So the more vulnerable they are, the more vulnerable they're going to be to infections and diseases. So similar to us, we get ill as well. So that these trees can also get ill. So we got damage done by wood boring insects. If we don't get actual cold times over the year, these insects actually get to hang out more outdoors and have prolonged time to actually feed on the trees. Um, and then the wounds on the trees allow for, pathogens to enter. So think about, you having a cut. If it's a cut that's not being treated, you can get an infection. Same thing happens here with these trees. So on this image here, we have on the left-hand side, we have a nice healthy oak tree. And then on the right, we have a tree that, is starting to get a lot of damage. There's some areas that are bare, some limbs that have fallen. And we see this. So if you're out and about, either in the woods or driving around town, you may see some trees that are looking a little sickly. So thousands of insects, insects are herbivores of oaks. Like somebody said in the comments, over 500 species are in the order of, Lepidoptera, which includes our butterflies and our moths. And there's a lot of different types of herbivory. So we have our leaf feeders. So, our caterpillars. We have things called leaf miners. And we'll go over there, kind of like making these trails. If you look at that leaf, you see these trails of where the insect has caused damage. They're actually eating under the tissues there on the plant. We have gall makers. So you see these leaves, either these leaves or shoots, branches, if they have these weird growths on them, that's probably made is called as a gall. And there are over, approximately 800 kinds of galls found on oaks in North America. Um, and they're usually just made by a particular insect. We have acorn weevils. So these are going to be insects that are feeding, on the acorns of the tree. And if you're walking about and you find some acorns on the ground and they usually have like a little tiny hole on them, that's usually an exit hole made by the larvae of the acorn weevil. And what's really, really cool is that when animals such as squirrels are looking for acorns, if you ever see them kind of like playing with it and rotating it around close to their mouth, they're actually feeling with their paws and with their teeth. If they find a hole in this acorn, then they know that the acorn is not viable, it's not good to even store it. So they'll chuck it, or move it along or try to look for another food. So there are over 100 species of insects that use acorns as a food source. We have sap feeders. So sap feeders are going to be insects like aphids, and the likes. We have like scale insects and things like that. If you ever see an oak leaf, or maybe you parked under an oak and you have all this sticky residue on your car, or obviously on the leaves, that's usually caused by these sap feeding insects, because they can't digest a lot of what they're consuming, all the phloem, the liquid they're ingesting from the tree, and they have to poop it out. And when they poop it out, it ends up being honeydew, and that's a sticky residue that attracts other organisms to them. That actually cause things to get moldy as well. We have our wood boring insects, and there's like like three different families of insects that actually do the wood boring. So they're going to be like attacking the different tissues on the trunks and the branches of the trees. We have root feeders. Root feeders are going to be like cicadas. Cicadas. We have our annual cicadas that come out every year, where they're living on the ground, feeding um, on the phloem that's coming through the roots. And a lot of these insects, they're going to be feeding on the trees. Some of them don't inflict a ton of damage that are actually harmful for the trees. Well, some of them actually do. Okay, and then some of the insects are vectors for pathogens. And what I mean by vectors is just that they help spread the disease. Sometimes they have the disease or the pathogens in their body, and by chewing and then their saliva being in contact with the tissues of the tree, well, they also cause that infection as well. So I'm not gonna get into, describing what types of herbivory are caused by chewing mouth parts, because that's usually the typical one that everybody knows. So let's talk about all the different kinds of not so common or not so well known types of damage that are seen on oaks. So you can put it in a chat. How many forms of herbivory do you see on this leaf picture here? So I'll be checking the hand and see if people have any answers. Let's see. Let's see. So we have, I see leaf feeders, leaf miners. I see 3 kinds from Kristen. I see Daddy put 5. I see Ed. I see leaf miner and something like skeletonizing. Okay. Mary Jo is saying 4. All right, excellent, guys. Thanks for participating. Let's find out. There are 3 different forms of damage on this. We have our skeletonizers right here, and we have our chewing. So it's just a little bit of pieces of the leaf therapy, and then we have our miners there. So there are 3 types of herbivory going on a single leaf. Sometimes these leaves even get like gall, so you'll have multiple forms of herbivory can be co-occurring on a leaf as well. So let's talk about leaf miners. So leaf miners are insects. They're gonna make a tiny. They're gonna burrow into the leaves to feed. So they're gonna be producing a lot of like patchwork under the leaves. So they just bite a little bit and they just crawl. They're very minute, and you can usually tell which insect is which just by the pattern. Sometimes they get very, very specific and the trail that they actually make when they're chewing up on insects. Now, this photo here is not it's not of oaks, it's just a variety of different plant species that do get leaf miners, but you can just imagine that on an oak tree, the different species creating those trails that are there. So those are gonna be our leaf miners, and then it's going to be insects and the larvae of various flies, moths, sawflies, and beetle species are going to be causing this. So, if you don't know what a sawfly is, a sawfly is insect that's related to wasps and bees. You can think about like a more kind of like prehistoric version of a wasp and a bee. Well, they're primarily herbivores. They're feeding on trees and they're causing this type of damage. On the bottom, so we have the the damage that's caused by the larvae of the slides, the shot hole. So you see there's like hole punches there, and then we have this leaf miter moth where it's just climbing. There's like this blotch. So instead of creating a trail, it just creates like this big, wide area of what it looks like is dry, but it's actually just being consumed there on the plant. And then we have skeletonizers. So skeletonizers are the ones that are going to be eating between the veins. So the insects are going to be doing that. They're going to be so we got the oak slug sawfly. So it's this one right here that's going to they have legs, but they're actually so short that it makes them look like they're actually kind of like little insects that are slug-like. Let's see, I have a comment in the chat. Let's see. Somebody's asking how do I view the presentation? I only see the commenter. Oh man, I don't know how to troubleshoot that real quick here. You may want to check your ribbon, and maybe there's a button that says show meeting. Maybe press there's a little drop down menu. Maybe you can it'll come up that way. You've seen so just like I've seen isopods skeletation as well. That's actually so cool. I've seen isopods feeding on leaves, but I've actually seen them doing that kind of activity. Thank you for sharing. That's actually really cool. So yeah, so I'm gonna have to look that up. That's fascinating. So yeah, so we have these insects that are gonna be chewing between leaves, and it looks, has actually looks really really neat. It has like this like almost like thinking like it could be like a stained glass pattern type thing. So it's gonna be caused by sawflies, and then it's gonna be caused by these like minute moth species. So I'm trying to keep track of the time. Okay, so well, now we're going to dig in to a particular species of herbivore that is actually causes a lot of damage on oaks, and this is the spongy moth. Okay, so spongy moth has been in the U.S. since 1869. It's been here for quite a long time, and it spreading started spreading from actually Massachusetts out and like the New England area, as it's making its way west across the Northeast into Michigan, into Minnesota. And the reason that we have it here is because they were trying to use it as a hopefully like a viable species to be able to create silk. So what happened is that they brought this foreign species. They were trying to use it for the silk industry, and it escaped. Now, when we're looking at down at the bottom, we get to see like the male, the female, and the species. So the male, you can tell it apart because either by its like grayish color, but it has these big plumose antennae. The antennae are kind of like very feather-like. And the female's white, and even though she has these wings, she really can't fly. She's usually so heavy with all the eggs that she's gonna eventually lay that she can't move that. So she just crawls, and she's usually kind of like sits and waits and attracts mates by males by releasing pheromones uh, into the forest. So the male is flying around, and they could smell the female from where she was, and they'll kind of like track their way to her. Um, they have that name spongy moth, it's because of their egg mass. So if you see the egg mass here, it just looks like this just blotch or this spongy material that is stuck onto a tree. That material that is on that egg mass actually allows it to be insulated, so they can tolerate low temperatures as low as -20 degrees. So they're pretty resilient, especially how in the Northeast, and there's like different methods to try to get, to control them. But as if you ever have periods where there is sunlight going through the forest and there's like direct sunlight in the trees, I've read an occasion that warming and then rapid cooling actually kills the moths when there is some direct sunlight, warm sunlight during the let's see, there's another. Yeah, so Patricia asking, is it similar to gypsy moth infestation? So gypsy moth was renamed a few years ago spongy moth because it's considered a slur to people who of Romani descent. So we don't no longer use that word. So now it's the same species, but it's just renamed spongy moth to be a more of a descriptive of their egg mass. So there's a whole thing like if you probably heard that birds are being renamed to be more descriptive of what their characteristics are. They've been doing there's similar things for insects, for plants, and things like that. So it's the same insect. Let's see. So they are broad generalists. So I say broad foliar generalists. This means that they will eat other species other than oak, but they have a preference for oak. And the oaks that they really prefer are red oaks, and red oaks are our most common oak species as well throughout the Northeast. So here's a tree stand here where these trees have been heavily defoliated by these little caterpillars that come out in huge numbers and just are just eating. If you've ever seen a outbreak of spongy moth, it's actually I quite disturbing. I once was working in the forest and I came with a bunch of caterpillars, either alive or dead, stuck to my clothing. So it's not fun. So with the life cycle. So um, by next month, if there's been like spongy moth in the area, you might start seeing some caterpillars emerging throughout the forest. Um, it may not be an outbreak year, so you might see just maybe one or two individuals. And then when we start getting into the summer, you start seeing their pupa. So this is their cocoon stage before they turn into adults. And then during the late summer is when they start laying these egg masses. Okay, so and then it just like so these egg masses, they're able, as you know, they're able to tolerate the winter cold, and they will like emerge back into the spring. Let's see. So outbreaks are cyclical, so they happen every 5 to 8 years. I remember I was out east near the PA New Jersey border. There was an outbreak over there. I saw it was a little town. So when there's an outbreak, then you see all these spongy mass, or there's just pupa, there's adults. So you have like multiple stages on this blotch on this tree here. You can see a female, and then um, the larvae produce a lot of silk, and you see them all kind of grouped together, kind of like sheltering in numbers. Some animals, if they're really, really attracted to them, they'll start picking them off and start eating them as well. So let's talk about like the natural way that we can that spongy moth is mitigated. All right, so think about natural predators. So there are insects that will actually eat them. So this is called a forest caterpillar hunter. So it has a perfect name. It loves to eat caterpillars, and this is a ground beetle that is just walking around down at the ground of a forest, maybe climbing up trees and looking for caterpillars of a variety of species to eat. These are native ground beetles, and this is a particular species called Calosoma that has been seen eating um, spongy mouth caterpillars in addition to other species as well. And then we have birds. A variety of species are able to find them. Like this robin here is feeding it to its young. And then we have mammals. White-footed mice have also been seen eating copious amounts of caterpillars, especially during those outbreak years that they use them as food. Okay. But other than just having natural predators that can eat them, we also have pathogens. So there are viruses like this nucleophyllohydrosis virus. Um, so this is a virus that is present in a lot of caterpillars, not just spongy moth, but could be it's a naturally occurring pathogen. But whenever the insect is kind of stressed or ill, then this pathogen can actually do quite a bit of damage. And here you have an image of what it looks like once it's like this caterpillar is kind of it's deflated, but what's causing it is that a lot of like the cell structure is actually the cells are being ruptured and pretty much just like liquefying the caterpillar from within, and then eventually dies. Um, and then we have other bacterium like BT. If you think about like BT crops, this is sometimes genetically modified crops have BT in them, and they're usually used to control insects that try to eat them. Well, BT is something that can be targeting spongy moth, and what it does is just it damages their stomach, their digestive tract, and then they starve and then they die. Well, it's rather and then one other fungus is called Entomophaga mymicum, and this one kind of just this fungus consumes the caterpillars from the inside out. Um, and these fungi or these pathogens spread throughout a forest either by other insects, maybe other caterpillars coming in contact with each other, but since birds are eating them, birds actually help spread these bacteria or fungi and viruses um, by consuming these caterpillars. And when their droppings go across the forest, sometimes those spores are present, and that's actually how it spreads. So yeah, so this is gonna be our information on and spongy moth. And yes, if you have spongy moth on property, there are methods like, putting up like burlap traps or sticky traps or even using insecticides. But I didn't want to focus on any on those type of things. But those are other methods that people have used or researchers have used to try to reduce populations of spongy moth in the area. Our other group of insects are our bark and wood boring insects. So these are going to be beetles in the families Buprestidae, Cerambycidae, or Cuculionidae. I know this is just like entomology terms. Buprestidae are usually are just like just grouped as wood boring beetles. They don't have a different name, but they're metallic and brightly colored. So think about emerald ash borer, if you're familiar with that beetle. That is a wood boring in the family Buprestidae. Have these beautiful metallic colors. The Cerambycidae are longhorn beetles. If you see a beetle with really, really long antennae, probably a longhorn beetle. And then we have our Cuculionidae. Those are the group of weevils, but there's particularly like little bark beetles. If you're out maybe in the woods, or maybe you have a property that's near woods and you're just outside hanging out, maybe eating lunch, you might see these tiny, minute beetles that are very clumsy. They're typically bark beetles that are feeding on the trees. So they're the ones that cause the most damage on trees by feeding on all the variety of tissues of the bark. So you have the phloem, the cannon, the xylem. It's like really just like digging in there, burrowing into the trees, and eating away at this tissue from within. And this is disrupting how the tree moves nutrients through all of its tissues by being fed like that. So a lot of these insects are very opportunistic. So they're really, really attracted to trees, especially when they're stressed out. So they can be stressed out by drought. They can be stressed out by previous insect damage. They start releasing these volatiles, the smell into the air that shows these insects like, oh, it's time to eat because this tree is weak. Because plants, they're not studying ducks most of the time. They have their own um, chemicals that they use as defenses. But when the tree is weakened already, then those natural or those chemical defenses don't actually function as well. These sensors can really take advantage and you know just cause a lot of damage. And the kind of way they categorize damage on a tree is like, well, you know, green, tree's alive, there's red, and then there's dead. So this is how you can break it down on this image here, that at the top the tree is dead, and then as the damage can be prolonged on what seems to be a healthy tree, then the leaves start to die off and turn dry. And the trees die kind of like in patchwork as they move down the tree. Down at the bottom, you can see, if you ever see the down tree, you're removing bark, you can see all these little trails on the bottom left-hand photo. And then the one right next to it actually has all these little dots. Those are usually the exit holes after the insect is done feeding. They actually emerge from there and become adults. A particular species that causes a lot of damage on oaks is called the two-line chestnut borer. So has the name chestnut in there because that's one of the trees it's feed, but this beetle actually feeds on a variety of different trees. It may have like a bit of a preference for chestnuts, but it can still cause a lot of damage, airborne damage on oak trees. So named because of its association with chestnuts, but can feed on different things. They effectively kind of girdle these trees, actually like eating away at it, and actually it's like as if you were actually like hacking away at it. This is what their larvae look like in the middle of photo. So an adult beetle has it's like this thin body, and some of the colors on it can be a little bit metallic. But the beetle larva here, this is the one that's actually going to be causing the damage within the tree, while the adults will just focus. They'll just eat some leaves every once in a while, but the larvae is where the damage is happening. 100%. The most consequential damage is happening from them. Let's see, there's a comment in the chat. Is this what killed the chestnuts early in the 20th century? The what killed the chestnuts was a pathogen, so they call it chestnut blight. Um, I'm sure there were insects as well that didn't really help the situation, but I believe I could be wrong, but I believe that most what happened to the chestnuts was mostly disease. Um, and so this could be that maybe these insects also help spread disease as well to those trees. Thank you for that question. Okay, so moving away from our boring insects, so now we're gonna be moving on to my favorite group. So this is the oak galls. I just want you to just look at this photo of all these different types of shapes on of these galls, and these are all on oaks, and they are going to happen in a variety of tissues. It could be a gall on acorns. It could be galls on the stems. It could be galls on leaf tissue. It could be gall on a flower. And these are just little outgrowths. So I want you to. These are abnormal outgrowths of a plant tissue. So the common comparison you can think about is maybe think about it as a tumor, as the tissue, the cells are being manipulated on this plant to create something that isn't that is not normal for this tree or for this structure of the plant. So they're going to be variety. They're going to be in a variety of different organs, and they're very, very diverse. This is just a tiny snapshot of how diverse galls can be. And they're going to be in different colors. It could be red, green, yellow, and black. And on an oak tree, it could be, as I saw me mention earlier, it could be over 800 different types of galls, and 700 of those galls are made by a single group of wasps. And they're tiny, tiny, tiny little wasps called cynipids or oak gall wasps. They're incredibly small. You may have seen one, but unless you're really, really looking for them, you may miss them. And this is what they look like. You can see here what a gall wasp looks like, and look at how small that is on a person's finger. The photo on the left, um, you can actually see her laying eggs in the tissue of a leaf. So these wasps, they don't have stingers like a yellow jacket or like an angel or like a bee does. This stinger is they have an ovipositor, and that's where they actually lay their eggs. Their ovipositors tend to be very thin and very sharp. Usually they can use it to make a little slit on the tissue where they can insert their egg. And then once their egg hatches, there's a larva, and then the larva releases chemicals in order to manipulate the tree. I have a little video. It's kind of grainy. It's a video that's probably over 20 years old from BBC with David Attenborough, but I'm going to play a little clip of it, and I might skip it to different sections for you to see. But we'll watch the beginning, and you guys just see kind of like some time lapse video of galls forming. It might be a little grainy at first. So let's see.
It's one thing to provide food and shelter in return for protection, but it's quite another thing to be compelled to provide a home where before there was none. But some insects have the ability to force a plant to do just that. They're called gall makers, and this oak tree is infested with them. This odd wrinkled object at the base of an acorn is known as a knopper gall. Inside, there's the tiny grub of a minute wasp. To understand how it got there, we have to go back to last spring. This tiny insect, scarcely bigger than a mosquito, is one of these gall wasps. There are lots of them flying around the oak flowers. Most of the flowers by now have been pollinated and are about to develop into acorns. The gall wasps too have mated, and this female is looking for a place to lay her eggs. She thrusts her ovipositor into the base of the fertilized flower and injects an egg. And that triggers a profound genetic change in the growing oak bud. It develops not into an acorn, but into something very different, a gall. Within, the tiny larva whose secretions have caused the change feeds on the oak tree's tissues. As summer proceeds, the galls become increasingly hard and woody. Autumn comes, and the oak tree starts to shed its leaves. It's shutting down for the winter. And with its leaves go both acorns and galls.
Let's see.
Inside the gall, something starts moving. The larva has turned into an adult wasp. It has spent 9 months within the oak tree's tissues. It has only a few weeks of its life left. Now, as an adult, it must look for another oak to inject with eggs. A single oak tree may be afflicted by 70 different kinds of gall, each produced by a different species of wasp, and each with its own particular contorted shape. These hard shells may seem to be effective defences for the little grub inside them, but not necessarily so. This is another kind of gall wasp, and she's not a genetic engineer, she's a burglar. Behind her she trails her equipment for breaking and entering, a drill. She carefully selects a site for her operations and takes aim. She flicks away the drill's sheath and starts work. Her aim has to be very accurate if she's to strike her target, the larva at the gall's centre. The tip of her drill has a sharp cutting edge of metallic zinc which pierces the gall tissues with ease. When she detects that she's reached the central chamber, a microscopic egg travels down the centre of the drill and into the larva. The operation is over. Her offspring will now hatch in the gall's centre, consume the flesh of the resident larva, and take over the gall.
Okay, so that was let me check the chat since I saw some comments there. So somebody asked if they'd hear a Swanson's thrush in the start of the video. I'm not much of a birder, so I'm sorry that I wasn't familiar with the bird that was in there. And Susan was asking earlier, so this is a series called Life on the Undergrowth. And so one of my favorite uh, BBC documentaries by David Attenborough that is all focused on arthropod and how they evolved. I highly recommend it. Kind of hard to find on DVD these days, but you find clips like this when you do some Google searches. So this is actually part of my favorite episode. I can talk about this episode for a long time. So what you saw at the end there is called a parasitoid wasp, which is a wasp that lays her eggs inside a host. And Yeah, so you have the parasitic, you have the small oak gall wasp making a gall, and then this one can take advantage and find them. Sometimes they use chemistry. They can actually smell the tracks of other insects, so they can actually pinpoint where the ones are inside the gall. Other cool features of galls, sometimes the galls produce sugars that it attracts ants, and ants end up protecting these galls from those parasitoid wasps that you saw at the end injecting in those eggs. So yeah, gulls are incredibly fascinating. These little minute wasps are also really, really interesting. I actually got to work with these wasps when I was doing research out in Cape Cod. And they, most gulls don't cause a lot of damage to oaks. But the ones in particular that I was looking at were actually, instead of using leaves to inject their eggs, they were actually injecting their eggs on the branches, causing the branches to swell up and become very brittle, and then they just snap off the trees without much effort. So there was a big problem out in Cape Cod with these gall wasps. All right, let's go on to the next section. All right, let's move on to pollination. Okay, so we're moving on from herbivores. Now we're going to talk a little bit about pollination. All right, so a lot of trees are wind pollinated, right? So if you ever see these catkins during the spring when oaks are trying to produce flowers, it kind of bothers us most of the time because we're just being inundated by all these trees releasing their pollen into the air. So these trees, because they haven't really co-evolved with insects as pollinators, they've mostly just done is like we're gonna throw as much pollen into the air, and then let's either we're gonna reproduce either by close contact, or we're gonna utilize the air in order to spread our genetics to other trees to reproduce. And oaks have both male and female flowers on a single tree. So here's just oak trees when they have a lot of catkins. On here, a photo of just like catkins on the floor, a ton of pollen everywhere. So the question is, do bees utilize their pollen? And the answer is yes. So a lot of the early spring bees that are coming out, some of these like solitary small bees, are taking advantage of these trees that are producing pollen. And it's not just oaks; it could be a variety of other trees. But we have an example of a bee on the left hand image of visiting bur oak flowers, and then on the graph where we have oaks in blue, you can see that these particular bee species are mining bees. Percent of the pollen that they're collecting when they emerge, over 80% of it is coming from oak trees. So they're utilizing this pollen. And um, the types of habitats they belong to. So which bees are using, where do they live, and how they end up using this pollen. So the bees that nest in the soil are utilizing this pollen. It's mostly going to be females because they have to they have to collect pollen to then burrow underground so they can feed their babies. And then you have the other particular bee species, the ones that nest in wood, that are also utilizing it. So more females than males are using them, but that's just for obvious reasons. The females are collecting a ton of pollen in order to provision it for their larvae to develop, um, you know, over the next few months. So they're collecting all this pollen, but is it beneficial to them? So here's another a type of there's another figure where it shows so wind pollinated trees. So we have the pollen from herbaceous type and woody type plants are actually containing more amino proteins or higher amino acids and protein content. So it's supposed to be like more nutrient rich. And when I did projects with bumblebees or other bee species, that bee colonies fed that pollen tend to be much heavier or bigger. And for a lot of these insects, in order to be able to be you know to be able to survive, usually getting as much food as you can during a larva is going to help you down the road when you become an adult. So bee colonies fed with pollen are actually like much heavier, much bigger, and they're healthier when feeding on tree pollen. Okay. So that was just a little like a little aside on how pollinators utilize oak trees for food. So shelter for insects. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard you know a ton of the campaigns like leave the leaves, and that's true. Leaving the leaves on your yard has a ton of benefits. You know, it could be your it's natural mulch, but it's also benefiting the critters that are out there. So if you leave the leaves on your property or leave some oak leaves on there, uh, caterpillars of great spangled fritillaries, woolly bears are using as shelter. Either they're gonna be like overwintering under the leaf litter, or it's just gonna be somewhere to hide on the other types of months. So these two types of both a moth and a butterfly species are using this to you know create some insulation, be able to go under their diapause or their version of hibernation during the fall and winter months. Bumblebees, um, if you ever see early spring, bumblebees are kind of like, flying around, booping around, looking for a suitable nest site on their leaves. A lot of the leaves that will be composed on the ground. This would be from oaks. I actually have a video of early spring queen bumblebee that I'll show you in a second. Um, Red banded hair streaks is another butterfly species. They lay their eggs on oak leaves that are on the ground, and those eggs emerge into caterpillars, and they become bird food. So you have this. Oh God, I forgot this bird's. I think it's a not sure if it's a chipping sparrow. I'm not really good with birds, so I'll admit that. But it's there on the ground, collecting caterpillars. So these red banded hair streaks, they lay their eggs. Those eggs turn into caterpillars, and then these birds get to, they get a food. They get some food out of it too. Um, Luna moth cocoons. So we look at Luna moth cocoons and we look at swallowtail butterfly chrysalis. They've kind of like adapted to kind of resemble leaf matter in their cocoon stage. And sometimes they're on these twigs or on these sticks, but sometimes they get knocked down and actually fall into the leaf litter. And that also, they could be protected on the twig, but they also still stay protected on the ground, and they maybe a predator that's looking for them may not notice them because they're so well camouflaged or blended in into that leaf litter. So there's a ton of benefits into uh, just leaving the leaves on your property for these insects that are beneficial to be able to survive during the fall, during the winter, and be able to come back in the spring. So here's a video. I was actually at Todd Nature Reserve. Right now I'm at Buffalo Creek Nature Park doing this presentation, but if you drive up, you'll get there. And this is in the spring. We have some May apples on the ground, and we'll get to see a bumblebee queen zooming around. And this is typical behavior of a queen that was in diapause or hibernating during the winter months and emerged in late March or early April and is looking for a new location to build a colony. So they're always flying low to the ground, looking between the leaves, looking for a hole in the ground, anywhere that could potentially be suitable for a new colony. So yeah, so that was a common eastern bumblebee. They're well, yeah, it says it in the name. They're very common, so it's one of the ones you'll see the most frequently out in the forest. Bumblebees are forest bees, and they use leaf litter. They use abandoned animal burrows as locations for to build their colonies. Okay, so we talked about shelter for insects. Now let's have like a little bit of oaks, insects, and birds. So just reiterating what we already know about caterpillars on oaks. Over 550 species feed on oaks, and this is just again just a tiny snapshot of the different species of caterpillars. So there's ones that are very spiny, very hairy. They have cecropia moth caterpillars. We have ones that are inchworms. We have tussock moths. We have um, the Limacodus or the slug caterpillars. So they're just incredibly diverse individuals in the insects that are on oaks. So birds are really, really taking advantage of this. So this is one of those blurbs from Doug Tallamy that, a single chickadee, or a pair of chickadees, they're collecting 350 to 570 caterpillars every day. Um, and that's in the span of a whole day from morning into the afternoon. So they're estimating that you know close to 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars are required in order to make one clutch of chickadees. That's a lot of caterpillars. And these insects are, they're laying their eggs on these oak trees. They're laying a ton of eggs. So so that has a benefit. Sometimes these caterpillars are have negative impacts on these trees, but with birds being present, it's providing a ton of food for these organisms. I have a little aside about golden crown kinglets. So golden crown kinglets, they are one of the smallest birds that we have in the Northeast that actually overwinters. Um, you know, when they're well, there's other birds that are migrating to warmer locations because and the ones that actually are migrating are feeding insects because there aren't that many insects present during the winter months, so they have to move to where the insects are. That's why they travel, to southern ranges where there's insects still active. But golden ground kinglets, who have a primarily insect diet, actually stick around the Northeast during the winter months. So you know, they stay warm by huddling together in old burrows or holes in trees from other animals. Um, and there was a biologist named Bernhard Heinrich who found that even in the middle of winter, kindling crops were full of caterpillars. Now, he actually had to uh, use kinglets that were killed for this study in order to assess the crops. But they were actually finding caterpillars during the winter months to actually sustain themselves. And what's really, really interesting is that we have caterpillars like this one right here that closely resembles a twig or a branch or offshoot of this tree. This is a type of inchworm. And they kind of stay, this is just one type of caterpillar, other species do different things, but they stay on a tree and they're actually very, very still. And they are able to keep themselves from freezing because within their body, they produce glycerol, they have glycerol, and glycerol does not freeze as well. So it kind of gives them like a bit of an antifreeze in their bodies, and they're able to um, go into diapause without their cells within their body freezing and then causing them to die. So these golden crown kinglets are able to still survey trees and able to pinpoint caterpillars in order to eat, even when most insects are not even present. They do supplement their food with a little bit with some seed, but their primary diet is insects. So I think it's pretty. I think it's fascinating that they're able to still find caterpillars so well during the winter months. So little frozen hot dogs or something like that on the or sausages on these trees that these birds are able to eat. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna leave my presentation there. That's the end of it. I want you guys to we have another presentation next month that we're going to be focusing on oaks and fungi. So that'll be Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. I don't have to read the year. But if you're interested in registering, you can actually use your phone. You can scan the QR code. It's going to be around the same time, 7 to 8:30. It's going to be an online program. Um, yeah, with that, I will, thank you for all your time and attention. If you want to ask any questions, please put it in the chat.